Aaron had gotten used to the sound of footsteps passing him without slowing down. Every afternoon he set up his old keyboard in the same busy plaza, a place where people rushed from one building to another, always in a hurry, always focused on their own lives. The plaza was loud, filled with voices, cars, and street vendors calling out to customers. But somehow, when Aaron placed his fingers on the keys, he felt a kind of peace inside all that noise. Music was the only thing that helped him forget his worries for a little while. The keyboard he used was more than 10 years old. The color had faded around the edges, and one of the speakers buzzed if he pressed the keys too hard. But Aaron never complained about it. The instrument had belonged to his grandfather, the person who had first taught him how to play when he was a small kid. Every time Aaron touched the keys, he felt as if his grandfather was still guiding him, still encouraging him to keep going. Aaron lived in a small apartment with his mother, who worked long hours and rarely had time to rest. He knew she wished she could do more for him, but he always told her that he was fine, that he was proud of her, that he didn't need anything more than her support. Still, he hoped that one day his music would help him give her a comfortable life. That dream was what pushed him to return to the plaza every day, even when barely anyone noticed him. On this particular afternoon, the sky was clear and bright. People walked faster than usual, probably eager to finish their day early. Aaron sat on his small folding stool, warmed up his fingers, and began playing a soft melody he had been working on for weeks. At first, nobody paid attention. A few children looked at him out of curiosity but were quickly pulled away by their parents. A couple of tourists took photos of the buildings behind him, not even noticing him in the frame. Aaron didn't mind. He continued playing, letting the music fill the air little by little. A few coins dropped into the small box he had placed beside him. Some people smiled politely as they passed. Others didn't look at him at all. He kept his eyes mostly on the keys, letting the sound guide him. Then he heard laughter, not the gentle kind that comes from someone genuinely amused. This was sharp, loud, and meant to be heard by everyone nearby. Aaron looked up slowly and saw a young woman standing a few feet away, surrounded by 3 of her friends. She wore expensive clothes, the kind that made people look twice. Her shoes alone probably cost more than Aaron earned in a whole month. She held a cup of iced coffee in one hand and her phone in the other. Her friends looked just as wealthy, with designer bags, shiny watches, and the confident attitude of people used to getting whatever they wanted. Aaron didn't know who she was, but he could immediately tell she was someone people normally treated with respect. Everything about her showed comfort and privilege. She was the kind of person who never had to worry about rent, bills, or old keyboards with buzzing speakers. She pointed at Aaron's instrument and laughed again. "Oh my God," she said loudly, making sure the crowd heard her. "Is this even working? It looks older than my house." Her friends burst out laughing. Aaron felt heat rise in his cheeks, but he stayed silent. He had learned long ago that talking back only made things worse. Some people enjoyed putting others down just to feel superior, and nothing he said would change that. The woman walked a little closer, her heels clicking against the ground. "Are you trying to be a real musician?" she asked, tilting her head. "This is kind of cute. Like a pretend artist." Her friends continued giggling. One of them even whispered loudly, "Maybe he's practicing for fun." "It's adorable." Aaron tightened his jaw and pressed one key softly just to calm himself. He had been mocked before, usually by strangers who thought street music wasn't a real job. But something about the way this group laughed felt more personal. More cutting, like they wanted him to feel small. He wanted to say something. Maybe defend himself, maybe explain why he was out here every day. But the words stayed inside him. Instead, he smiled politely and said nothing. He didn't want to create a scene. He didn't want to give them the satisfaction of seeing him upset. A few people passing by slowed down, watching the scene. Some looked uncomfortable but didn't interfere. Others simply walked away. No one wanted to get involved. The woman took a step back and waved her hand dismissively. "Anyway," she said with a smirk, "good luck with your hobby." She dragged out the last word, making it sound like an insult. Then she turned to her friends and said, loud enough for Aaron to hear, It's crazy how some people really think they can make it with no talent and no money. They walked away. Still laughing, still talking about him as if he couldn't hear a thing, Arn took a slow breath, trying to steady himself. He felt a mix of embarrassment and frustration. Moments like these made him wonder if chasing his dream was foolish. It was hard enough to be ignored. Every day being mocked made it even harder. But giving up wasn't an option? Not when music meant so much to him. He placed his hands back on the keys, but for a moment his fingers froze. The melody he had been playing earlier suddenly felt different. It didn't feel peaceful anymore. It felt heavy. His mind kept replaying the woman's laugh, her mocking voice, the way her friends looked at him like he was beneath them. But Aaron wasn't the type to let pain silence him. If anything, it made him want to play even more. He closed his eyes, exhaled deeply, and began playing again. This time, the music came out stronger, fuller. There was emotion behind every note, emotion he didn't usually show. His frustration, his sadness, his determination all blended into the melody. It wasn't perfect, but it was real. Some people nearby stopped walking and turned toward him. Even a few who had ignored him earlier now stood still, listening quietly. A couple whispered to each other about how beautiful the music sounded. A small child tugged on his mother's hand and said, "Mom, listen." Aaron didn't open his eyes. He didn't want to see the crowd. He only wanted to feel the music. He wanted to remind himself why he was here, why he kept trying, why he believed that one day someone would hear something special in his playing. After a few minutes, the melody ended softly. Aaron opened his eyes and saw a few people clapping gently, offering small smiles before they moved on with their day. It wasn't much, but it was enough to warm his heart after what had just happened. Still, the woman's words stayed with him. They bothered him more than he wanted to admit. He wondered who she was, why she had felt the need to belittle someone she didn't even know. Maybe it was because she had never faced real struggle. Maybe she didn't understand what effort looked like when it wasn't polished or shiny. Aaron told himself not to think too much about it. People like her came and went. Their opinions didn't define him, but deep inside, something had shifted. Her words pushed a spark in him, something that whispered, "Prove her wrong." Prove yourself right. As the daylight began to fade and the plaza lights turned on one by one, Arn packed up his old keyboard, folded his stool, and slung his small bag over his shoulder. His hands were tired, but his mind was full of ideas, of emotions, of melodies forming slowly but surely. He didn't know yet how much this single afternoon would change his life. He didn't know that the same woman who mocked him would hear him again soon in a completely different setting, and her reaction would be nothing like today. All he knew was that he had a new melody forming in his heart. A melody born from pain, but shaped into something beautiful. A melody that, though he didn't realize it yet, would eventually change everything. Aaron woke up the next morning, feeling the weight of yesterday still on his shoulders. The plaza was empty now, and the sunlight streamed through the small window of his apartment. His mother was already gone to work, leaving him with breakfast that had cooled on the table. He picked at the toast and sipped the tea she had made, but his mind wasn't on food. His mind was on music, on the memory of that wealthy young woman laughing at him. He couldn't stop thinking about her words. She had called him a pretend artist and laughed at his keyboard. Every time he remembered it, he felt a flicker of anger, a little sting of embarrassment, and yet, beneath it all, a strange kind of motivation. He realized that maybe the reason he felt so strongly was that he truly cared about his music. That it wasn't a hobby, it was his life. Or Arn's apartment was small, almost bare. The walls were painted a soft cream, and there was a faint smell of old books and polish in the air. On a small shelf by the window sat his grandfather's old music notebook, filled with faded notes and annotations. He walked over and opened it carefully, brushing his fingers over the pages. The handwriting was messy but beautiful, full of little instructions, reminders, and encouragements that his grandfather had left for him years ago. Sitting down, Aaron began to write in his own notebook, trying to capture the melody that had formed in his mind after yesterday. He hummed softly, letting the tune come naturally. Each note carried the memory of her laughter, but instead of letting it hurt him, he turned it into emotion, shaping it into something that was uniquely his. He wrote slowly, carefully, making sure every part of the melody had feeling. He thought about his mother as he played. She had always worked so hard for him, taking late-night shifts and doing whatever she could to make sure he had enough to eat and could go to school. She never complained, never asked for anything, but he knew how tired she was. Every time he played, he thought of her, hoping that one day his music would allow her to rest, to live comfortably, and to feel proud of him. The thought alone pushed him to play longer, to pour every ounce of energy into each note. After a while, he picked up his old keyboard and began practicing again. It wasn't easy. Some keys stuck, and sometimes the sound was distorted, but he didn't care. He had learned long ago that talent was not about having perfect instruments. It was about heart, determination, and the courage to keep going when no one was watching. And for Aaron, every struggle with the keyboard was part of the story he was trying to tell through his music. As the hours passed, he thought more about the woman who had mocked him. Her laugh had been sharp, almost cruel, and he realized that people like her had probably never experienced real struggle. They had money, comfort, and attention handed to them. Aaron had none of that, but he had something they might never understand: resilience. He reminded himself that her opinion didn't define him, but at the same time, it had sparked a fire within him. He wanted to prove, not to her, but to himself, that he could create something beautiful despite the obstacles. Later that day, Aaron took a walk through the quiet streets near his apartment. The city was alive with noise, but it felt calmer than the plaza. He watched people go about their day, some laughing, some arguing, some lost in their own worlds. He thought about how music connected people, even strangers. A song could make someone smile, cry, or remember something long forgotten. He wanted his music to do that, to reach people in a way that words alone could not. As he walked, Aaron noticed a small music store tucked between two tall buildings. The sign above the door was faded, but inside, the smell of polished wood and sheet music was strong. He entered, hoping to find inspiration. The store was filled with instruments of all kinds, from shiny new keyboards to guitars and violins. Aaron ran his fingers over the instruments, feeling their weight and imagining the sounds they could produce. The shop owner, an older man with kind eyes and a gentle smile, noticed him. "Looking for anything special?" he asked. Aaron shook his head. "Just thinking," he replied. The man nodded as if he understood. "Sometimes just touching the instruments helps you hear the music in your head better," he said. Aaron smiled softly and nodded, letting his hands glide over the keys of a newer keyboard. It felt smooth, responsive, and almost magical compared to his old one. But he knew he couldn't afford it, not yet. Leaving the store, Aaron felt a mix of longing and determination. He couldn't buy a new instrument now, but he could practice harder, refine his melodies, and make every note count. That thought made him smile. Talent didn't depend on money, it depended on effort, heart, and persistence. And Aaron had all three in abundance. That evening, he returned home and began playing the melody he had started that morning. His fingers danced over the keys, creating a sound that was soft yet powerful, simple yet full of emotion. Each note carried the story of his life, the struggles, the dreams, the small victories, and even the moments of humiliation. As he played, he felt lighter, as if the music itself was lifting the weight from his shoulders. After finishing, he sat back and closed his eyes, letting the silence fill the room. He thought about how the melody had changed since yesterday. It was no longer just a reaction to mockery, it had become a reflection of his life, his hopes, and his determination. He realized that music could be more than just notes on a page. It could be a way to show the world who he truly was. Aaron knew that one day, someone would hear his music and understand it. He didn't know when or how, but he felt certain it would happen. He imagined standing on a stage, playing for a room full of people who were moved by his melodies. He imagined his mother smiling proudly, finally able to rest without worry. He imagined creating something so real, so full of heart, that even the people who had mocked him could not deny its beauty. He thought about the woman again, the one who had laughed at him. He didn't wish her ill, and he didn't want revenge. But he wanted her, and everyone like her, to understand something important, that talent and effort could not be measured by wealth or appearances. He wanted to show that real value came from heart, persistence, and the courage to follow your dreams. No matter the obstacles. As night fell, Arn sat by the window, looking at the city lights twinkling in the distance. The streets were quieter now, and the cool breeze carried the faint sounds of distant music and laughter. He felt a sense of calm, a sense of purpose. The melody he had been working on now felt complete in his mind, even if he had not yet written it down entirely. He whispered softly to himself, almost like a promise, "I will keep going. I will play. I will make them see, even if it takes a long time." He didn't know exactly what seeing meant, whether it was recognition, respect, or understanding, but he knew he had to keep trying. Music was his language, his voice, his way of reaching the world, and he would not let anyone, not even mockery or doubt, stop him from speaking it. Aaron spent the rest of the night practicing, refining, and imagining. His small apartment echoed with the sound of the old keyboard, and though the instrument was far from perfect, every note felt alive. He worked until his fingers ached, until his mind was tired, until he felt he had poured every part of himself into the melody. Finally, he leaned back, breathing heavily, and smiled. He had created something that felt real, something that came from the very core of his being. It wasn't just a response to mockery, it was his story, his voice, his heart on the keys. And for the first time in a long time, Aaron felt a quiet, steady hope. A hope that the next time someone heard him, they would understand not just the music, but the person behind it. Little did he know that hope was closer than he thought. That very melody, born from determination and a touch of pain, would soon be heard by the woman who had mocked him, and when she finally listened, nothing would ever be the same. And with that thought in his mind, Aaron closed his eyes, letting the music linger in the air, a soft reminder that even in the darkest moments, passion and persistence could create something beautiful. The week passed quickly for Aaron, though every day felt like a mix of hope and nervous anticipation. He continued to practice his new melody, making small changes, adjusting the tempo, experimenting with harmonies. Each day, the tune became more alive, more personal. It wasn't just notes anymore. It carried his story, his feelings, and his dreams. It carried the struggles he had faced and the determination that refused to let him give up. One afternoon, Aaron received a call from a local charity organization. They were hosting a small community event to raise funds for children's education and had invited local artists to perform. Aaron was surprised but thrilled. This was an opportunity he had never imagined. He would be playing in front of a real audience, not just people passing by in the plaza. For the first time, he felt a mix of excitement and nerves. He spent the next few days preparing carefully. He polished his performance, making sure every note carried the emotion he wanted to express. He practiced the transitions between melodies until they were smooth, and he worked on controlling the volume so that the soft notes and the strong notes could create a balance that would capture the audience's attention. He wanted every person listening to feel something, even if it was just a spark of curiosity or a small smile. The day of the event arrived. Aaron woke up early, his heart beating faster than usual. The plaza had always been familiar, but this venue was different indoor, with a small stage, chairs arranged neatly, lights focused on the performers. There was a certain calm in the organized setting, but also a pressure that made him nervous. He carried his old keyboard carefully, aware that it wasn't fancy, but trusting that it could still produce the magic he had poured into it. As he entered the hall, he noticed people settling in. Families, local residents, and a few volunteers filled the chairs. Aaron's hands shook slightly, not from fear, but from the thrill of finally having a stage that mattered. He sat up quickly, making sure the keyboard was stable and the sound was clear. He took a deep breath, closed his eyes for a moment, and whispered to himself, "This is my chance. Make it count." Then, from the back of the room, he heard laughter. It was a voice he instantly recognized. Liana, the young millionairess who had mocked him in the plaza, was standing near the entrance, dressed elegantly with her friends. She had been invited as a VIP guest for the charity. And now, seeing Aaron on the stage, she raised an eyebrow in surprise, and noticed her briefly, but he didn't let it distract him. He reminded himself that this performance was for himself and the audience, not for anyone else. Still, he felt a quiet curiosity. Would she recognize the change in his playing? Would she understand the music in the way he felt it in his heart? He started playing. At first, the notes were soft, almost hesitant, as if he was testing the waters. But then, as he let himself feel the melody, the music opened up. It flowed naturally, with emotion that filled the room. Every note carried a story, the struggles, the moments of doubt, the flickers of hope, and the determination to keep going despite the odds. The audience was silent. No one moved, no one whispered. Even the children stopped fidgeting and looked toward the stage. Aaron didn't notice anyone in particular. He only noticed the music and how it felt in the room. The sound filled the space, wrapping around the people listening, touching something inside them that words could not reach. Then, he glanced up briefly and saw Liana. Her expression had changed completely. The amusement and arrogance that had been on her face before were gone. Now, her eyes were wide, and her lips were slightly parted in surprise. She was clearly captivated. The melody was unlike anything she had expected. It wasn't loud or flashy, but it was powerful in its honesty. It was not a performance meant to impress, it was a story told through music. And she could feel every emotion in it. Aaron's fingers moved faster now, but carefully, letting the energy flow into every chord. The music rose and fell, creating waves of feeling that seemed to make the audience hold their breath. Some people closed their eyes, letting the sound wash over them. Others leaned forward, trying to catch every note, as if the music itself was speaking to them. As the performance continued, Liana felt something inside her shift. She had laughed at him, judged him without knowing him, assumed his talent was nothing. But now, she couldn't deny the skill, the passion, and the dedication that Aaron displayed. She realized that she had been wrong to mock someone simply because of appearances. She had been blind to the effort, the heart, and the courage it took to follow a dream when everything seemed stacked against you. Aaron reached the climax of the melody. The notes soared and then softened, like a wave crashing and then retreating gently. The room was completely silent, every person listening as if the music had stopped time. For Aaron, this was the moment he had imagined countless times, when people would not just hear his music, but feel it. Finally, the last note faded. There was a brief moment of silence, like the world was catching up, and then the audience erupted into applause. Some stood, some clapped energetically, and some whispered to each other about how incredible it was. Aaron's heart raced, and a small, humble smile spread across his face. He had done it. He had shared his story, his emotions, and his determination. And people had understood. Liana stood quietly, clapping along with the others, but her mind was racing. She felt a mixture of guilt and admiration. She had mocked him without reason, and now she realized how wrong she had been. The melody was not just music, it was proof of his hard work, resilience, and talent. She wanted to speak to him, to apologize, but she didn't know what to say. Words felt inadequate after experiencing something so genuine. After the applause died down, Aaron stepped off the stage. Volunteers approached him, praising his performance, asking him about his background, and wanting to know more about his music. A few parents approached him, thanking him for touching their children with the melody. Aaron smiled, feeling a warmth in his chest. This was the recognition he had hoped for, not just fame or money, but acknowledgement that his music had meaning. Liana approached him cautiously. Her steps were slow, her hands slightly trembling. Aaron noticed her but continued packing his keyboard carefully. She stopped in front of him and looked him in the eyes. I didn't expect this," she said softly. "I judged you before and I was wrong. Your music. It's incredible. I'm sorry for what I said." Aaron paused, considering her words. He could have ignored her, walked away, or even expressed his frustration. But he chose to respond with kindness. "Thank you," he said simply. "It's okay. People judge without knowing sometimes. I understand." His smile was calm, genuine, and without bitterness. For Liana, the encounter was humbling. She realized that true talent and dedication were not measured by wealth, appearance, or confidence. They were measured by heart, effort, and persistence. She felt a respect for Arn she had never felt for anyone who had ever mocked someone else. She also felt a spark of inspiration, realizing that life had more to teach her than privilege ever could. Arn walked away slowly, still carrying his keyboard, still feeling the adrenaline of performing. He thought about the journey that had brought him here, the struggles, the long hours of practice, the moments of doubt, and even the mockery he had endured. Every experience had shaped him, and every note he played carried a piece of that journey. He knew that this performance was only the beginning. There would be more challenges, more obstacles, and more opportunities to grow. But for the first time, he felt confident that people would hear not just his music, but the story behind it. He had turned pain into melody, mockery into motivation, and hope into something tangible that others could feel. As he left the hall, the evening air was cool and refreshing. The city lights reflected in the windows of the tall buildings, and Arn felt a quiet sense of fulfillment. He had shared a piece of himself, and the response had been more than he could have imagined. Somewhere in the crowd, Liana was watching, reflecting, and learning. Somewhere else, the music continued to echo in hearts, inspiring, comforting, and connecting people in ways words could never reach. And in that moment, Aaron understood something important. Music was more than sound. It was a bridge between souls, a way to reach people, a language that transcended judgment, appearances, and doubt. And as he walked home that night, he already felt the spark of his next melody forming, ready to tell the next chapter of his story. After the charity event, Arn returned home with a mixture of exhaustion and excitement. His hands ached from hours of playing the keyboard, and yet his heart felt lighter than it had in a long time. The applause, the smiles, and even the quiet admiration of the audience lingered in his mind. But what stayed with him most was the glance from Liana, the woman who had mocked him in the plaza. He couldn't forget the way her expression had shifted, from amusement to surprise to something like respect. For the next few days, Aaron continued to practice, but he also noticed small changes around him. People he passed on the streets recognized him now. Some nodded in approval, some offered small smiles, and a few even stopped to ask when he would play again. It was strange and new for him, to be noticed for something he had poured his heart into, and he welcomed it quietly, without letting it overwhelm him. Meanwhile, Liana couldn't stop thinking about that day either. The melody Arn had played stuck in her mind like a persistent echo. She had expected something simple, maybe even sloppy, but what she had heard was pure, honest, and powerful. She found herself replaying the performance in her head, imagining the care, the emotion, and the determination behind every note. It unsettled her in a way she hadn't expected. For the first time, she realized how wrong she had been to judge someone so quickly, to assume that wealth and comfort made her more capable of understanding talent. Liana decided to visit the charity office again, though she told herself it was for the event's follow-up. In truth, she wanted to see Arn again to speak to him properly. When she arrived, the volunteers recognized her immediately, welcoming her warmly. She thanked them politely, but her eyes kept searching for him. Arn was helping carry some leftover equipment back into storage. His fingers were slightly bruised from playing, but he didn't complain. When he saw her approaching, he froze for a moment. He wasn't afraid, but he was cautious. He remembered the mocking words from the plaza, and a small part of him wondered if she had come to repeat that behavior. But when she reached him, she spoke softly and sincerely, with no trace of arrogance. "I wanted to apologize," she said. "The other day, in the plaza, I shouldn't have laughed. I judged you without knowing you, and that was wrong. Your music? It's incredible. I'm sorry." Aaron paused for a moment, then nodded. He could see that she meant it. He could see the honesty in her eyes. "Thank you," he said simply. "I know people judge sometimes. It's okay. What matters is what you do, not what you say." His voice was calm, steady, and free from bitterness. They stood in silence for a few moments, the noise of the charity office around them fading into the background. Liana found herself struggling to find words beyond her apology. She had always been used to being in control, used to being the one admired, the one with influence. But Arn's presence made her feel different. He didn't need to impress her. He didn't care about her money, her status, or her expectations. He only cared about his music, his story, and the people who listened. Arn noticed her discomfort but didn't comment on it. Instead, he asked politely, "Would you like to hear more of my music sometime?" It wasn't a challenge, it wasn't a boast, it was simply an offer. Liana blinked, surprised by the simplicity and sincerity of the question. She nodded slowly, realizing that this wasn't about proving anything. It was about sharing something meaningful. Over the next few weeks, Aaron and Liana crossed paths several times, sometimes at the charity office, sometimes at small community events. Each encounter was different. Sometimes they talked about music, sometimes about life, and sometimes there were long silences where nothing needed to be said. Liana began to notice how grounded Aaron was, how focused, how genuine. She began to reflect on her own life, her own assumptions, and the privileges she had taken for granted. Aaron, for his part, didn't treat her any differently than anyone else. He was polite, friendly, but never patronizing or condescending. He didn't flaunt his talent, and he didn't let her wealth or influence intimidate him. He simply shared his music and his story in the quiet, humble way he always had. And slowly, Liana started to learn not just about music, but about perseverance, empathy, and the value of seeing people for who they truly are, not what they appear to be. One afternoon, Liana asked if she could visit Aaron while he practiced. She had always been curious about how he created his melodies, about the process behind the music that had left her speechless. Aaron welcomed her quietly into his small apartment. The walls smelled faintly of old books and polish, and the sunlight streamed through the windows, illuminating the keyboard and the music notebooks that filled the small shelf. Aaron began to play, letting her listen without interruption. She sat quietly, absorbing the melodies, feeling the emotions carried by each note. She noticed how his fingers moved with care, how his eyes occasionally closed as if he were listening to something inside his own mind. She realized that each melody was a reflection of his life, his struggles, his dreams, and his unwavering dedication. When he finished, Liana spoke softly. "It's amazing," she said. "I can hear everything, the effort, the emotion. It's like I can feel what you feel." Aaron smiled gently. "That's the point," he said. "Music is more than notes. It's the story behind them. It's how we connect with people, even if we never speak." Over the following days, Liana began to support the small community events more actively. She helped organize programs, encouraged other artists, and even shared Aaron's story with friends who might be interested in his music. She was learning that influence and privilege could be used for more than comfort. They could be used to amplify voices that deserved to be heard. Aaron noticed the changes too. He was careful not to assume too much about her intentions, but he could see that she genuinely wanted to understand, genuinely wanted to help, and he appreciated it not for her recognition, but for the way it allowed his music to reach more people, to inspire more hearts. One evening after a long day of practice, Aaron reflected on how far he had come. The mocking words of the plaza, once painful, now felt like a stepping stone. They had pushed him to create something better, something stronger. He realized that challenges, criticism, and doubt were part of the journey. They were not obstacles meant to stop him. They were tests, shaping him into a musician, a storyteller, and a person capable of resilience. He also reflected on Liana's journey. He could see that she was learning too, slowly but surely, that true respect and admiration were earned, not given freely because of status or wealth. He understood that people could change, that kindness and understanding could transform even the proudest hearts. That night, Aaron played his melody one last time before going to sleep. The notes filled the room softly, carrying all the lessons, the struggles, and the victories of the past weeks. He felt a quiet satisfaction, knowing that he had stayed true to himself, his music, and his dream. He knew that the journey ahead would still have challenges, but he also knew that he was ready for them. And somewhere, Liana reflected on her own growth. She had learned humility, empathy, and the value of persistence. She had seen someone rise above mockery, fear, and doubt, and she realized that the world was bigger than wealth, appearances, or privilege. She understood that true talent and effort deserved recognition, and that sometimes the greatest lessons came from unexpected places. Arn's melody had not only touched hearts but had started to change perceptions, one person at a time. It had begun with mockery in a busy plaza and had now grown into something meaningful, powerful, and transformative. And both Arn and Liana knew deep down that this was only the beginning of a story that would continue to unfold in ways neither of them could yet imagine. The city lights shone outside the window as Aaron closed his eyes, letting the music linger in the air. He had learned that passion and perseverance were stronger than judgment and doubt. He had learned that sharing your heart, even in small ways, could inspire and move people. And he had learned that even those who had once mocked you could change, given the right moment to understand. As the night deepened, Aaron whispered softly to himself, a quiet promise for the future. I will keep playing. I will keep creating. No matter what comes, I will stay true to my music and to myself. And with that, he finally rested, ready to face whatever the next day and the next melody would bring. After weeks of performing at small events, practicing tirelessly, and sharing his music with anyone willing to listen, Aaron began to notice a change in his life. Slowly, almost imperceptibly at first, his melodies were reaching more people. A few local bloggers had written about him, mentioning the street musician who had stunned everyone at a charity event with his heartfelt compositions. Some of Arn's performances were even recorded by audience members and shared online. The comments were filled with admiration and encouragement, and each one filled him with a quiet pride. Even though things were changing, Aaron remained humble. He continued to practice in the small apartment he shared with his mother, in the same quiet streets where he had begun. His keyboard was still old, its keys slightly sticky and the sound imperfect, but Aaron knew that the music came not from the instrument but from the heart behind it. Every note carried his story, every melody a reflection of his struggles, his dreams, and his determination. One afternoon, a local music producer contacted him. The producer had heard one of the recordings from the charity event and wanted to meet. Aaron felt a mix of excitement and nervousness. This was an opportunity he had dreamed about, but he knew that it would require focus, patience, and staying true to his music. He agreed to meet and spent the next few days preparing, refining the pieces he felt most connected to, and imagining how he could share his story through his melodies. When the day of the meeting arrived, Aaron carried his old keyboard carefully, as always. He arrived at the studio, a place much larger and more professional than any venue he had ever played. The producer greeted him warmly, curious about the young man who had touched so many hearts with a simple keyboard and a melody that spoke of determination and hope. Aaron played several pieces, including the melody that had changed the way Liana saw him. The producer was impressed, not just with the music itself, but with the passion and story behind it. Meanwhile, Liana continued to follow Aaron's journey. She had become more involved in supporting community events and in helping him share his music with a wider audience. But her support was quiet and respectful. She never tried to overshadow him or take credit. Instead, she used her influence to provide opportunities for Aaron, allowing people to hear his music without making it about herself. Watching him perform, seeing the joy and emotion his music brought to others, she felt a sense of pride not for herself, but for the person Aaron was becoming. Aaron's life began to shift in small but meaningful ways. He was invited to play at larger events, and slowly, more people began recognizing him on the streets. Some approached him to ask for advice or to simply say that his music had inspired them. Others were curious about his journey, how he had managed to stay motivated despite the obstacles he faced. Aaron always responded with humility, sharing his story honestly, emphasizing the importance of persistence, patience, and believing in oneself even when the world seems to ignore you. One evening, after returning from a particularly successful performance, Aaron sat with his mother in their small kitchen. She had made tea and a simple dinner, and they ate quietly, enjoying the comfort of home. She looked at him, her eyes filled with pride and emotion. I always knew you were special, she said softly. I always believed in you, even when it seemed no one else did. Aaron smiled, feeling a warmth that no applause or recognition could ever match. I couldn't have done this without you, he replied. Your support has always been my strength. Meanwhile, Liana watched from a distance as Aaron's music reached more people. She had learned so much from him, not just about music, but about humility, effort, and the power of authenticity. She began to see the world differently. She understood that wealth and status could never replace heart and dedication. She also realized that sometimes the greatest lessons came from the most unexpected sources. Aaron had taught her that respect and admiration were earned through action and sincerity, not assumed because of privilege. One day a major opportunity arrived. A well-known music festival reached out, inviting Aaron to perform on a larger stage in front of a significant audience. The thought of it made his heart race, but he knew this was the culmination of all the effort, practice, and persistence he had poured into his music. He spent the following weeks preparing, carefully selecting his pieces, and practicing until every note was perfect, or as close to perfect as his heart wanted it to be. When the day of the festival arrived, Aaron stood backstage, looking at the crowd that had gathered. Thousands of people were waiting, some chatting excitedly, some holding signs, some just waiting for the music to begin. His fingers felt the familiar ache of long hours of practice, but he welcomed it. Every ache, every tired finger, every sleepless night had led to this moment. He took a deep breath and reminded himself of why he had started playing music in the first place, not for recognition, not for wealth, not for praise, but to share something meaningful, to touch hearts, to tell stories without words. As he began to play, the crowd fell silent. The melodies he had worked on for months, born from struggle, hope, and determination, filled the air. Every note carried emotion, every chord told a story. People listened, captivated. Some closed their eyes, some leaned forward, some held their breath. The music created a connection between Aaron and everyone in the audience, a silent conversation that needed no words. Liana stood near the front, watching intently. She felt a surge of pride and emotion as she listened to him play. The young man who had once been mocked in the plaza was now sharing his music with thousands. She remembered that day clearly, the laughter, the arrogance, the mistakes she had made in judging him so quickly. Now, watching him perform, she felt humbled and inspired. She had learned that true talent, heart, and dedication could not be ignored. The performance reached its peak, the melody rising and falling like waves, soft yet powerful, simple yet deeply moving. The audience was entranced, completely absorbed in the music. And when the final note faded, the silence was broken by a roar of applause. People stood, cheering, clapping, and some even wiping tears from their eyes. Aaron smiled, a humble, genuine smile, feeling the joy of sharing his music and connecting with others. After the performance, many approached him, offering congratulations, praise, and opportunities to collaborate. Producers, musicians, and fans wanted to know more about him, about his journey, about the story behind his melodies. And Aaron responded with humility and honesty, sharing his experiences, his struggles, and his dedication to music. He spoke not just about notes, but about resilience, perseverance, and believing in oneself even when the world seems indifferent. Liana approached him quietly. "You did it," she said softly, her voice filled with genuine admiration. Aaron looked at her, smiling. "We did it," he replied. "It wasn't just me. Everyone who believed in the music, even when it was hard. They helped me get here." She nodded, understanding that his journey was more than a performance. It was a story of persistence, hope, and human spirit. Aaron's music continued to grow in popularity. Recordings were shared online and more people discovered his melodies. But he never let it change who he was. He remained humble, grounded, and focused on what mattered most, the music itself and the people it touched. He continued to practice, to write, to perform, always striving to improve and always remembering the journey that had brought him here. His relationship with Liana evolved as well. She continued to support him quietly, learning from him and using her influence to help others discover genuine talent. She had learned to appreciate effort, heart, and humility above all else. And through their shared experiences, both of them had grown. He had gained recognition, and she had gained understanding, empathy, and perspective. In the end, Aaron's melody, the one born from the mockery in a busy plaza, had changed everything. It had transformed his life, opened doors he never thought possible, and touched the hearts of thousands. And it had transformed Liana, teaching her lessons about humility, respect, and the power of sincerity. Aaron's journey was not just about music. It was about perseverance, hope, and believing in oneself despite doubt and criticism. It was about understanding that challenges, mockery, and obstacles are not meant to stop you, they are meant to shape you, to make you stronger, and to guide you toward your true path. And as Aaron continued to play, every note carried his story, every melody carried his heart, and every performance reminded the world that true talent, when combined with dedication and sincerity, could not be ignored. His music had changed his life, touched countless hearts, and reminded everyone who heard it that even in the face of doubt and mockery, dreams are worth pursuing. And persistence can turn the smallest spark into a brilliant light. The plaza, once a place of mockery, was now a memory, a reminder that beginnings are often humble, that struggles are part of growth, and that the smallest notes can eventually create the most beautiful symphonies. Aaron looked at the city skyline, at the lives his music had touched, and whispered softly, "This is just the beginning." And with that, he played again, letting the music carry him forward, into a future full of hope, opportunity, and endless melodies waiting to be discovered.